Hi everyone, this is the Muromachi period group. We're going to be discussing our Sogu Roku analysis. We are Elise Lee, Jamuel Desimore, Andy Vega, and Alejandro Roquesto.
So the thesis is Sogugoro games in Japan serve to instill national pride no matter what, whether it was in a time of war or peace.
Thank you, Alejandro. My Sugoroku, as far as the visual analysis is that it was made in 1940, so it is around the war of World War II. That is apparent because you see soldier uniforms, you see naval ships, and you see army vehicles. You can't tell by the architecture, but with everything else, we can presume that this was around the time of World War II. The coloring I interpreted as normal, but there was heavy national flag influence. It was in several of the pictures, and as propaganda that these games are, it makes sense because symbolism is big in propaganda to promote, and these flags promoted specifically nationalism and influencing the opinion of the nationals in Japan. Composition wise, there was one larger picture at the end that sends a direct message of male children being more important than female children. And as we'll see, the little pictures start by showing the routine of female children specifically being sent to support the country's war. Each picture, or most pictures, you'll see a little girl sewing, you'll see another picture of her farming, you'll see one of her learning to keep the education going in the community. You'll see them pledging allegiance to the flag in more than one picture. You'll see them preparing packages and caring for younger children than them. And there's even more pictures of them having allegiance to the flag. As propaganda, this makes sense because that is signaling that of what they can personally do to help. Propaganda sends the text of what you can do. And these little girls are learning that, yes, that is in my power. I can help my country by doing each and one of these little things. The audience is designed clearly in this picture for female children, and it shows them doing arduous mental and physical labor, which shows that this is propaganda because it's influencing their behavior, their everyday behavior at that. The goal of this game, particularly, was to maintain female submission to Japan's will, particularly of winning this war. I could not understand really where it was progressing, but I see that this is about wartime submission and getting everybody on one accord. And the message is to do as you're told and not to fight what the elders have for you to do by wanting something else. There's no individualism. And as propaganda, I saw that it's inciting an emotional reaction to lay down your personal goals and pick up the goals of your country. As far as historical context and interpretation, we have we're making sure that there is the prevention of a natural uprising. They don't want protesting of this war. An example of how that has happened historically in the world is here in America around the U.S.-Vietnam War. There were protests all around the country because Americans were decidedly against it after a while. Japan's leadership also wanted to make sure we win the war, and they saw the benefit of this to get people behind it. And this aided in Japan's goal of being taken seriously on the world stage. So in summary, for all Japanese in the earliest 20th century, it meant that you had to put your country over yourself, as they were still on a mission to increase their global political and soon military capital. And for females, society put them in submissive roles. When war came, the submission was demanded in a more intense manner as the men were off at war, and they were given the responsibility as well as the guilt to make sure Japan did not fail.
So, so my puzzle is called Imperial Troops Fighting. Some of the context for this is that this takes place during World War II in the 1940s. So as we can see, the images depicting the Japanese military using multiple forms of combat. We see them in the skies with airplanes, on foot, in trenches, on horseback, etc. We can kind of see the time period by what they're using, by the technology that they're using for warfare. For example, obviously nowadays people don't really use horsebacks or bayonets like we see depicted, but it's also not old enough that they're used because we see them using things like tanks, airplanes, etc. So it's kind of right there around the 1940s. We do see a lot of color being used. The image is very bright, but probably the biggest color that's used is red, and we see it all over with the Japanese flag. So red has multiple meanings, such as the sun, which is what it's used for in the flag. But we also saw greens. We also see greens in the uniforms to help represent nature, strength, and yellow to represent energy. But one thing I did notice is the blue sky, and the reason I want to bring that up is because I feel like this time the war is very dark. This is one of the obviously one of the worst things that has ever happened in human history, and they're kind of making it very bright, very easy to look at. Um, Obviously we know that this was a really dark time, so we see kind of like the blue, beautiful skies just to kind of represent the lightness instead of that the darkness, right? So for as far as composition, there's one image in the middle, and that image depicts victory. It depicts victory and unity, and every fight and every little piece kind of leads up to that. Now moving on to the next slide, which is the content analysis side of it. Let's take a look at the audience. So the audience for this image is families and children. So this really helps instill pride and purpose towards the country. The image also wants is also trying to attract um, people to kind of join the army and kind of have that unity and strength that we see depicted with the middle. Now the end goal is simple. It's victory. You have to guide the army through multiple styles of fighting to find that victory. Now, to progress, like I mentioned, the players need to go through the multiple battles, whether it's trench warfare, which is notoriously very difficult, through fights in the air with airplanes. The message, it's educational, right? So this is for children most likely, and it helps promote pride, militarism, and the glorification of Japan. It's also meant to teach those who don't know what the war is really about. And players really learn that the war is very honorable and they have to do whatever is necessary. And it helps instill unity and national pride. Obviously, it's glorifying war, but because we know that war is just a horrible thing and it really helps to glorify, make it kind of look lighter, which is what I mentioned earlier. So finally, some of the historical context for it is, I mean, this is propaganda. This is made in a time of war and it's representing warfare, right? This is in the middle of one of the greatest wars of all time, arguably the greatest, and Japan is right in the middle of it, right? It also helps to show Japanese expansionism. Obviously, at this time, they're trying to take over Eastern Asia. They've been trying to do that, and we kind of do see that by the military success with the image in the middle. And I think this is used really to kind of promote the message that Japan is actually known for, which is they do whatever it takes to win. They do not surrender, and they they genuinely believe that surrender is worse than death. And this is instilling that message for younger children at a young age. So yeah, that concludes my slides.
Great job, Alejandro. So, talking about my slides, the name of my suku is Another World Instant, which, I mean, if you look at my Sugaroku, it makes actually a lot of sense. This was made in 1931 during the rapid military buildup before World War II. Much of the Sugaroku is red, like the Japanese flag, and in the Sugaroku, you can see on multiple slides. I think on Space 13, there's children with Japanese flag as well. There's a lot of flags, which is to show national pride, and it's similar to like when American products when you have red, white, and blue stars everywhere. So one of the images that are much bigger than the others is right in dead center in my Sugaroku is a bunch of children cheering, seeing a bunch of military officers. The reason behind that is because of the massive militarization, they want the children to be on board when they grow up to want to revere and join the military themselves. They want to put the military on a higher pedestal to make it seem more appealing, and they wanted the public to get in line supporting the victories and seeing military victories as one for them and the public. Other interesting things in the Sugaroku is the going on at the beginning. There's more traditional Japanese values. There's like traditional Japanese clothing, there's traditional Japanese things. But then like in Space 7, there's a cutting of the top knot, which is a traditional Japanese hairstyle, which could be seen as a big part of traditional and classic Japan. And the more and more you go, the more Western it is, the more Western clothes, the more Western ideas, the more industrialized the slides are. So going on to my content analysis in the next slide. Yeah, this game was targeted for the Japanese public, but mostly for the children. I feel like this is made to indoctrinate children as a propaganda piece, showing that you need to move on from the traditional Japanese mindset onto a Western mindset to really progress in life. As I mean, even the last space in the game is a Western business meeting with the Japanese person sitting there, showing that like the the culmination of your life should be to be on the same equal footing as Western nations and Western powers. Uh, it I mean, as I said, the top knot's cut off in slide 7, and slide 6 is the last one with someone in traditional Japanese clothing. Beyond that, everyone is actually wearing Western clothing. So, in this game, I think it shows the priority of the Japanese government at the time to rapidly militarize, westernize, and modernize. And it shows even the also something interesting connecting to Elise's point on her Sugoroku, there's actually not many women in here either. All the women are in subservient roles in these, so it's also showing and promoting those values as well towards Japanese children for women to be subservient, males to be dominant, but the males to be more active in the military. It also shows some colonial ideas where there's Japanese teachers teaching. I mean, it looks like uncivilized. It's like naked brown and black children. So I think it's showing that the Japanese are also a civilizing force because they want to be seen on that same equal footing as other Western powers. And I think this message was being pushed at the time because of the rapid militarization, even though it wasn't World War II yet. But they wanted to have just in case for a big war to have the public support as well, so there wouldn't be any protests like a Vietnam War. And that is the end of my content analysis. Thank you.
Thank you. Mine is called the Gendai Fujin Sugoroku, and it was made in 1913 Japan. So this is a really early Taisho era, and it focuses on the women and just sort of traditional Japan at the time in general. So with the colors, it was mainly red and blue, and from really what I could decipher, blue is sort of, or the blue rays. I see the center, kind of like the middle of the sun, kind of representing Japan, and I see sort of the rays, like the rays of sunlight. So I see sort of the blue and red sort of as it makes it easier to see on the eyes, but also maybe the red is sort of seen as maybe something that's not societally acceptable for women because this focuses on women's role in society at the time. So I believe there's a picture of a little girl crying and that's in red, but there's another one where she isn't and it's in blue. So that's why I saw it that way. Um, the composition also, it's like I said, it's like a sun, and so the center of it, it's the biggest and it's the most centered because it's a married couple, and in a way, this Sugoroku just is a cycle of life, in a way of how they perceive how the traditional woman should be. So it's going through the cycle of life until she gets married. So I believe it's like the biggest and most censored because it's kind of, in a way, it's almost contrasting to Jemuel since it's focusing on tradition. It doesn't have any Western ideals. Um, and also in terms of the content, like I said, the audience I think mainly is directed towards women because it focuses on the role that women have and what their role is in this society. And so I believe that everything leading up to the marriage, which is like the victory of the Sugoroku, is sort of representative of how that society saw women or how traditional Japanese society saw women. Uh, the goal the goal is, like I said, the victory is to get married and have a family. In a way, I also see it as a cycle because the married couple is in the middle and then the cycle begins with a baby. So I believe it's sort of a repetition of a cycle. Um, and so the progress, it's like I said, in the woman goes through different stages of life and ends in marriage, which then restarts into another family. And so the message, I believe, overall is just the value of tradition and the importance of a woman's role in society and the family. So I believe it, even though this was the early Taisho period and there was a lot of Western influence, there is no Western clothing depicted. It's all traditional clothing. And so I believe this message was kind of supposed to influence women in the sense of supporting more traditional ideals and sticking with the family, that sort of thing. And I believe that is what it focuses on. And so, with the historical context, it's also similar. The increased foreign influence at the time and the emphasis on Japanese tradition in light of that foreign influence. So, during that time, there's a lot of fighting back and forth between do we want more Western influence or do we want to stick with traditional Japanese culture? And so there was kind of this cultural war happening at the time. But this one definitely leans towards the more traditional side of things. That's the ending of mine. But next up is the essential question, which is what did it mean to be Japanese in the rapidly changing Japan of the early 20th century? And so, an answer to that is that these games, they were a tactic by the Japanese government to just send the message of putting Japan as a nation over oneself. So at the time, it's a really collectivist society. You can see that a lot in the sort of the more military-like sugorokus. It's like you're serving a greater cause than yourself. Unity, in a way, also similar. Soldiers coming together, and it's something like Alejandro was saying. They would not surrender. They prefer death over surrender. So it was something unity, just bringing the country together. I believe even in the Gendai Fujin one, sort of bringing the country together over tradition, and also the just traditional values of community. So just community overall. They wanted to compete with modern government and warfare, but they never wanted the Japanese nuclear family to be forgotten. So in a way, like the Gendai Fujin one, like sort of emphasizing tradition while also maybe adapting to a new Western influenced society. That's the way.
Okay, and essential question number two. How did Sugoroku games, such as one form of public advertising, demonstrate and promote the norms and ideals of being Japanese in the modern Japan of the early 20th century? These games worked by making the Japanese citizens emotionally charged and want to desire to do their part in helping the collective country. No matter if you were man, woman, old, or young, it really built a sense of nationalism and pride. The games promoted specific symbolism, constantly with nationalism and the Japanese flag, collectivism, and the family unit with militarism and the battle victories. I believe these games really pushed militarism because that was, at the time, I believe the military buildup was one of the most important things that were taking place in Japan. And these messages, like all propaganda, always lacked the telling of the whole story. It spoke of war, but they never talked about the side effects and the cost and the devastation that war caused. They spoke of community in Japan and pushing forward a Japan expansion, but they never talked about the tolls and the death that happens in war as well.